Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This episode is essentially a follow-up to the deep dive number 7 on Cervi 319. We're going to look at the narrative of crime scene analyst or CSA Dave Yocum. Now, Dave Yocum's name also comes up in the Patrick Frazee case. I wrote about that in a book called Murder Most Foul. And he's obviously in demand if the same character is sort of being used, the same expert is being used in different crime scenes. Obviously, someone like Yocum photographs the scene, but also sees into the scene in a way that ordinary officers and even detectives wouldn't do. And so we're going to look at how exactly that happened at Cervi 319, a complicated crime scene, a difficult crime scene from the perspective of access, and also to some extent a dangerous crime scene. So we're going to look at that in terms of the discovery documents. Dave Yocum also did the processing of the crime scene at the 2825 Saratoga Trail, and that'll be the follow-up to this episode. Before we get started, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment. If you do share, please use the hashtag TCRS. And let's get started. So we kick off on discovery page 481, dealing with the investigative supplement. And it is authored by, looks like, Joey Weiner. And it references quite a few officers, Commander Bryce Borders from Firestone Police Department, Detective William Dewitt, also from Firestone. They were sort of involved in the drone surveillance of the site. And there he is, Dave Yocum, crime scene agent or crime scene analyst, CBI Denver. And then there were other agents there on site as well. So now we go to the actual narrative, which starts on discovery page 482. And this refers to the search of the Anadarko Petroleum well site, Cervi 319, and recovery of Shanann Watts' body. On the 15th of August, Colorado Bureau Investigation CBI agent Matthew Saylor and agent Greg Zentner responded to Anadarko well site Cervi 319 near Rogan, Colorado to conduct a search. So bear in mind, all of this was taking place after the confession and sort of on the same day, I guess. So the confession happened on a Wednesday, and at the same time, in the afternoon and the evening, all these agents were on site. We met with Anadarko employee Luke Eppel at the Love's truck stop in Hudson and followed him out to the well site, which is located on the Cervi Ranch in the 12300 block of Weld County. Now, Luke Eppel obviously was Chris Watts' boss, and he was going to chaperone them through the site. Firestone Police Department Commander Bryce Borders and Detective William Dewitt also met us at the Love's truck stop and responded to the well site. The Cervi Ranch is a cattle ranch in Weld County with numerous oil and gas wells leased to Anadarko Petroleum and other companies. Well site Cervi 319 is located at the following GPS coordinates, and there they are, and is located west of Weld County Road 386. The well site is accessed via several dirt roads and is in a remote area with rolling hills, sagebrush, cactus and other vegetation. The well site is fenced with barbed wire and contains a wellhead, a separator and 3 storage tanks on a gravel pad. So you might think that's an error, the 3 storage tanks, but there are basically 2 main tanks and then another kind of tank besides that, which is sort of a lower level tank. I'm not sure if that's for mixing or for what, but there are 3 storage tanks. All of the land contained within the fence is leased by Anadarko Petroleum from the Cervi Ranch. Eppel explained that the oil and gas and some water are pumped through the separator into the 2 holding tanks, while the gas is pipelined to another location. So these are some of the ingredients, in a very basic sense, of the inside of the oil tanks. Oil, gas, right, and some water. And so what is happening is these ingredients are pumped and mixing and in a state of flux inside these tanks. The water and oil mixture are held in the two holding tanks with a capacity of 400 barrels, and the water and oil separate. The water is then fed into the smaller open top holding tank next to the oil tanks. That's what I mentioned sort of earlier. So they don't say anything here yet about temperatures, and they don't say anything here about chemicals, if chemicals are used to try to separate the water and oil. Upon arrival at the well site, Commander Borders and Detective Dewitt deployed an unmanned aerial system drone to survey the well site at approximately 15:27 hours. So this was actually while I think Chris Watts was still busy with his polygraph. And I actually dealt with this in chapter 14 of Drilling Through Discovery, the moment that Chris Watts agrees to take the polygraph. And it is immediately following Agent Coda saying to Chris Watts, why should I believe you? How do I know to believe you? And then Chris Watts does a long spiel about the kind of person he is. And that's actually a very important response from Chris Watts that I think many people have underestimated. The drone was equipped with a camera that provided a real-time video feed, as well as the capability of taking digital video and still photos. And we know it was this drone that provided a photo which then came onto the desk in the cubicle where the agents asked Chris Watts to sort of say where this had happened. And what it looks like was going on here was you had two kind of intelligence operations going on at the same time. You had the actual interrogation of Chris Watts, and then you also had the Anadarko investigation with the Colorado Bureau investigation. And they were already on the well site, based probably on the GPS data and based on what was being said by other people like Kessinger, by Chris Watts' colleagues. So it was kind of a parallel investigation going on while he was gabbing in the little cubicle. In the brush to the south of the pad, Detective Dewitt and Commander Borders located what appeared to be a sheet lying on the ground. So that was the first sign of foul play, was the sheet just lying out in the open. And this is something that shocked and surprised everybody, that you had this effort to hide the bodies and then this silly mistake, if you want to call it that, in the bed sheet from 2825 Saratoga Trail just lying out there in the open. Of course, probably one of the last things Watts anticipated was a drone being used at his work site, giving this sort of eye in the sky perspective. They took a still photograph of the sheet, and upon inspection it appeared that it was possible that there were unknown objects underneath the sheet. So they were under the impression that under the sheet was the grave, and that turned out not to be so. And so what is quite interesting is, although they found the sheet, they didn't touch it. They would first photograph it and first kind of process the scene in that way. Detective Dewitt and I approached the sheet from the north, and just inside the brush, just south of the edge of the gravel pad, we encountered an area of bare dirt. So on their way to this sheet, they kind of stumbled upon the bare dirt that appeared to have been recently disturbed. And this is why I say I wonder whether Chris Watts didn't leave the sheet there as a way of showing himself, in terms of a line. The grave is here, and it's sort of in line between the line of on the line of the sheet and the tanks behind the grave. that's just a theory, and it's sort of borne out by the fact that when they walked towards the sheet, they stumbled upon the bare dirt. Does that make sense? Detective DeWitt and I then backed out of the brush and returned back to the pad. So when they found that, they removed themselves from the area. They were probably waiting for other people to cordon off the scene, and they probably needed some kind of warrant as well. Binion Cervi, owner of Cervi Ranch, was contacted by phone. So that was probably the next step, was that they thought that, okay, something is going on here. It looks like something is going on. Now we need to escalate this to the actual owner of the property, and that was Binion Cervi. And she was contacted by phone at 16:17 and she provided consent to search the property and collect evidence. And now if you think about how long it took to actually find something using the drone, it really wasn't that long. They started at where was that time? At 15:27, so almost 3:30, and they'd contacted Binion Cervi around about 50 minutes later. So it really didn't take long. Of course, they were very well equipped, weren't they? And anyway, the owner provided consent to search the property and collect evidence to law enforcement. Commander Borders and I then approached the sheet from the south along the fence line of the well site. The wind was blowing in that direction. I think this is quite an important comment here. I was actually going to bring this up. You know, what were the weather conditions like? Well, there you have them. That the wind was blowing in that direction. And I was attempting to determine if I could detect the smell of decomposition. And that may have been the next step, if they weren't able to locate the grave, would have been to bring in cadaver dogs. And he says, upon reaching a closer proximity to the sheet, I was able to determine that it was not as large as had appeared on the video screen of the drone controller, and most likely did not have any objects underneath it. So it seemed like they'd thought that that was actually the grave marker, that the sheet was actually the grave marker when it wasn't. I noted that the sheet appeared to be a fitted sheet of the same printed pattern as a flat sheet located in the kitchen trash can during a search of the Chris Watts residence earlier in the day. So they'd been busy, hadn't they? So the search early in the day actually had taken place throughout Tuesday night, very late on Tuesday night, and also very early Wednesday morning. I think Yocum arrived at the scene something like 5 or 6 o'clock that morning, and then the same day, as far as I know, he was at or very late the same day, he was at Cervi 319. And that is how quickly the investigators sort of caught up with Chris Watts' scheme. So now we go to discovery page 483. It just says, I also noted 2 black lawn and leaf garbage bags with red drawstrings in the brush near the sheet that appear to have been left there recently. So the question that sort of arises, were these garbage bags for the children or were they for Shanann? When Chris Watts was interrogated in Dodge at Dodge Correctional, he said that they were for Shanann. I think put around her feet and her head or something like that. But it is interesting that there are 2 of these garbage bags. So basically there are 3 bodies and there are 2 garbage bags and a fitted sheet. And that's something we've never really gotten feedback on, is what was found, what sort of forensic evidence was found inside these garbage bags. And that's something that probably crime scene analyst Dave Yocum would know. And So you had the agent requesting CBI crime scene analyst Dave Yocum, who, as I say, is kind of like a Sherlock Holmes. Is the guy that you call when you've got a crime scene, you know something has happened, and you need him to pick up all the little things that everyone misses. You need him to sort of tippy-toe through the scene and find the things that are almost invisible, like a hair, like fibers, like in this case, disturbed grass or disturbed earth. And he's going to see with that sort of Sherlock Holmes-like prescience, right? And it says here he assisted in the previous search of the residence, and he provided me with a copy of the photographs of the sheet located in the trash can. So within one day, they were able to locate they were able to link the crime scene at Cervi 319 to 2825 Saratoga Trail. I was going to say the bedroom, but I don't believe the crime actually happened in the bedroom. But let's just say, for intents or purposes, that the two crime scenes are linked. CSA Yocum provided me with those photographs via email, and I compared the sheet in the photograph to the sheet on the ground of the well site and determined that they had the same printed pattern. I then physically checked the sheet and determined there was nothing underneath. So only after all that did he actually kind of disturb the crime scene, if that makes sense. There were dirt stains on the sheet, including a large area of dirt stain with patterns that appeared to be from the sheet being dragged on the ground. And this is something that hasn't been photographed all that well, or the photos that we've seen aren't all that clear, but they appear to be photos possibly taken with a cell phone. And I think the reason for this is out of safety concerns. They were, I think, afraid that a DSLR camera could possibly ignite a spark and be dangerous in that area. So they preferred the taking of footage from cell phones. Photographs were taken of the sheet on the ground and of the stains on the sheet with my cellular phone. Now, just to be clear, normally, CSAs and just general processing of crime scenes tends to be with high quality photographic equipment. I'm not saying you would never use your cell phone, just that typically you would have high quality photos to rely on as well. In the Watts case, you've kind of got, in this case, you've got really good quality drone footage, which I showed you guys yesterday. And then you've got pretty bad quality on the ground cell phone footage, right? Copies of the photographs are attached to this report. I also checked the garbage bags and found that neither bag had anything in them. It doesn't say anything about whether there was a smell in the bag or any kind of dirt or sort of traces of blood or anything like that. CSA Yocum was requested to respond to assist in processing the scene. It was determined that a search warrant would be sought for the property. So you may think that the fact that they were on the property with an aerial drone meant that they already had a warrant, but they needed a different warrant to look for evidence and to exhume a body. That was a little bit different. When advised that additional personnel would be responding, Apple decided to shut down the well and vent the holding tanks for safety. Now, this is something that I think a lot of people have completely forgotten about, is no matter what was done by Chris Watts, no matter what kind of measures he took to cover the scene, to get rid of evidence, the venting of the holding tanks meant whatever he'd left behind was potentially going to be contaminated or destroyed or lessened by this venting. So when the tanks are vented, there's a kind of a blast of gas, and it's for, as they say, safety reasons. But you can imagine if the hair or pieces of skin or blood or whatever were on the sides of these tanks, this venting would blast this evidence away. And a lot of people have argued with me saying if Bella's frenulum was hurt, there would be evidence of it. Well, this would have potentially gotten rid of that evidence. Now, when Chris Watts did a pressure test, the same thing happened, and I think there were at least 2 pressure tests. So effectively, there are 3 major venting episodes, and each one was approximate to a big blast of gas from the inside of the tanks, which would have gotten rid of vaporized evidence, so something that had sort of dissolved into the air. It would have just caused a lot of contamination and kind of a diminishing of whatever evidence had been left behind. So just that one fact there played out in Watts' favor, unfortunately for Yocum, who was to follow. And then CSA Yocum and CSA Caitlin Schroeder responded to process the scene. While waiting for the search warrant, I was advised by CBI agent in charge Kirby Lewis that Chris Watts had confessed to dumping the bodies of his wife Shanann Watts and his children Bella Watts and Celeste Watts at the well site. So although they were already at the scene, they already knew where the bodies were. Before Chris Watts even confessed, they already knew where the bodies were, which shows you the speed at which this investigation was proceeding. The coroner was then requested to respond. AIC Lewis also advised me that Chris stated he left some of the girls' clothing and some toys wrapped in the sheet that we had located. I don't think that is true. Chris Watts has done this a few times. You have the investigators leading him by the way, dropping breadcrumbs for him, and he kind of picks them up, telling them what they want to hear. And one of the things they said to him is, did you take, toys for them? And he said he did, and I don't believe that's true. In any event, no toys were found at the well site. I think if they were taken there, they would have been found. They weren't found in the at the well site. They weren't found in any of the vehicles. They weren't found, full stop. And what I would like to know is which toys were supposedly missing, and if they were missing, can you sort of say that these toys existed and they don't exist now? I'm not saying it's impossible. It is possible that he took them with and then disposed of them. But of course, him saying that he took the toys with and wrapped them in the sheet, that's simply not true. And yeah, they were on scene showing that. Bear in mind, at this point, he was blaming Shanann, and maybe in his mind he thought putting the toys with the children was like an act of love. So Commander Borders and Detective DeWitt again deployed the drone to search the well site for these items before the sun set and it became dark. So you could argue that the toys blew away. I don't see that happening. They would be heavier and tend to not catch the wind as much as something like a sheet. Of course, anything's possible. The other possibility is that he could have buried them somewhere, and I did notice more than one area of disturbed earth. So in that area, so it is possible that he just buried them somewhere else. A thorough search of the area was conducted, but no items were located. To be honest, I think that was just a lie, that he didn't take toys along. And why would he if the children were deceased, or if the children were going to be deceased? One possibility is that a toy next to the child's body when the child died would have cadaver traces on it, and that's why we'd want to get rid of the toy. You have a situation potentially similar in the Madeleine McCann case with the cuddle cat, and cadaver dogs did actually scent they found traces of, or allegedly found traces of, cadaver traces on Madeleine's cuddle cat. I later received information from AIC Lewis that Chris Watts had marked a copy of a photograph of the area previously taken by the drone with the locations of the bodies. Chris indicated that Shanann was buried in the area of disturbed dirt we had previously located. So that's quite important to emphasize, is they knew where Shanann was buried essentially before Chris Watts confirmed it. And that Bella and Celeste were each in separate oil tanks, well, that they didn't know. And this is the area that is quite shocking, is that even though they were on site, they couldn't really believe it. So when they were told, okay, the children are in these oil tanks, they sort of said, that's, we don't think so. Can you confirm that? I was provided with a copy of the photograph marked by Chris and observed an S indicating Shanann on the area of disturbed dirt and a B indicating Bella on the west oil holding tank and a C indicating Celeste on the east oil holding tank. I think one issue that this raises, as horrible as it is to think about, was Bella placed in the oil tank first, or was Celeste placed in the oil tank first? Now, no, he said he placed Celeste in the oil tank first. That does make sense because I think the east holding tank was closer and Celeste would have been easier to get into it. It's just my opinion. After the search warrant was secured, CSA Yocum and CSA Schroeder documented the scene with digital photographs and measurements. They collected the sheet, black trash bags, a rake head that was found stuck in the ground on the north end of the disturbed dirt, and a wooden handle apparently belonging to the rake head that was found in the brush to the east of the area of disturbed dirt. So quite a lot of things were left behind. Eppel, CSA Yocum, and I climbed the stairs to the top of the oil holding tanks. Due to the dangerous conditions associated with opening the tanks, Eppel was required to complete additional paperwork and accompany us with a gas monitoring device. So when they go to investigate the scene, Eppel is kind of going up there trying to make sure that there's no gas, and just the gas coming out of these tanks can be disorientating. I've heard people say that your eyes literally water and burn with the because of the kind of corrosive nature of this raw crude gas that is escaping. The membranes. Some people have bloody noses having visited these tanks, and now to say that when that's the case, you put bodies in there, that's not going to destroy evidence. I mean, that's crazy. I'm talking about it's not only going to degrade the actual human being dropped into the oil, but also anything that they have inside their bodies, including, or even outside, including injuries. This is going to degrade it. Eppel was required to complete additional paperwork. I was only allowed to use an intrinsically safe flashlight. So that's something else, was if they wanted to look inside the oil tanks, they couldn't use the equipment that they would want to use. They were sort of stuck with something that would not ignite or cause a spark. And so there were all sorts of safety issues. And this is the incredible thing, is that they actually looked into the oil tanks to see if they could see anything inside them. So they actually looked inside the oil tanks with a flashlight. And he says, I was unable to observe any objects in the tanks, and noted that my vision inside the tanks was obstructed by visible gas fumes. So what he's saying there is, he basically looked inside the tanks and couldn't see anything. And so law enforcement now have some doubts about Chris Watts' story. Is this, there's no traces from what they can see of clothing, or they can't see anything in the tanks, so could this be true? And then he says, I noted that the only openings on the top of the tanks, and therefore the only access available to Chris to place the bodies, were very small. So here they are just struggling to believe what he's saying. They've looked in the tanks, they don't see anything there. Is his story true? They don't want to waste their time. They don't want to go on like a wild goose chase. Can you imagine if Chris Watts had said, well, look, they're not in there. Sorry, I lied. And said, no, I actually put them in Cervi and then another Cervi, and just sent the cops on a wild goose chase. That would have been like a psychopathic criminal. And when they didn't find any in that tank, said, I'm sorry, it's actually that one. He could really have sent them on a wild goose chase. He made things a lot easier. Of course, he also made things a lot more difficult by committing the crime and committing it the way he did. But he made it a lot easier by just telling them exactly what he did in terms of the disposal immediately afterwards. And he must have thought it was plausible deniability in terms of him murdering his own children. If he said, okay, well, Shanann committed the crime, I just did that. And, I didn't know what I was doing. I think that is what he was playing at. We took photographs of the openings with a tape measure across them with my cellular phone. The openings measured 8 inches across. So these guys kind of know what they're doing, and they are quick. I mean, it's the obvious thing to think is, does this make sense? I provided this information to investigators at the Frederick Police Department. So now they at the point where they've now measured the opening, and he did say, well, it's about, you can basically just fit your arm in there. Is this true? Is this even possible? And Frederick Police Department then conveyed the message to the agents who checked with Chris Watts, and he said it was. CSA Yocum located numerous strands of hair that appeared to be blonde in color, stuck to the rim of the opening of the east holding tank. So that is the tank with that held Celeste, and her hairs were arguably light in color than Bella's, and also longer hair. The other thing to bear in mind is one of the tanks had a lot more product inside, and so stirring them, and I'll say this under correction because it could be the opposite, but I would imagine that if there's more product in it, stirring them would create a stronger release of gas than if there was less product in. Almost like if you're boiling water and there's not a lot of water in a pot, and you lift the lid, there'd be less steam than if there's a pot that's almost full of water. Does that make sense? So one of the tanks was going to have a stronger release than the other tank. The hair was photographed using Yocum's cellular phone. He was unable to utilize his SLR camera and flash due to the danger of the flash igniting fumes, and collected the hair as evidence. Now, we've never seen that. We've never seen those photos. And it's just photos of hair. It's not bodies, or it's just hair, and we've never seen that. So there are aspects of the discovery that we have not been privy to. Arrangements were made to have the oil holding tanks drained in the morning, so despite the fact that they'd found them, the bodies would now be in the state, in this crude oil, for a fourth day. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and they only came out sort of mid-Thursday afternoon, if I remember correctly. It could have been Thursday mid-morning, but it was basically 4 days that they were in oil. Arrangements were made to have overnight security by Frederick PD officers. Upon arrival of Weld County Coroner's Office Investigator Joey Wiener, we began to excavate the area of disturbed dirt. Special Agents Philip Jones and Mark Lehrer of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Detective Dave Bormover and Officer Scott Coonrod of the Frederick Police Department also arrived on scene to assist. Photographs were taken to document the process. We've seen some of those photos that were certainly taken in the day and some where darkness was falling. The portion of Shanann's body closest to the surface was located just 3 inches below the surface. The body was lying face down in a kneeling type position, with the head facing in a westerly direction and in a declining position deep in the ground from a lower torso. Shanann's arms were outstretched in front of her, and her feet were pulled up underneath and behind her. I think that is a critically important thing as well. Was she killed in that position? Or was she just stowed in the back of the truck in that position? And when Chris Watts was asked, did you manage to pin Shanann's arms down? He said no. But bear in mind, if he'd attacked her from behind, for example, on the stairs, she would have struggled to get to someone who was behind her. For example, someone with his knee on her back, and her arms would be stretched out in front of her, trying to crawl away or trying to push against the floor, because of the fact that she couldn't breathe. Shanann was exhumed from the ground and placed in a body bag. Investigator Weiner took possession of Shanann's body. See CSA Yocum's report for additional information. End of report. And that is it. I will deal with CSA Yocum's report dealing with 2825 Saratoga Trail in a follow-up to this particular episode. Thank you for listening. Bear in mind, I've written a book, Two-Face Drilling Through Discovery, and it takes us step by step through the discovery, but also through the fascinating first interrogation before he was Mirandized, interestingly enough, between FBI agent Graham Coder and Chris Watts between 7 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Tuesday night. And that was when Chris Watts wrote down a statement, and the agent then questioned and cross-examined Chris Watts effectively on the statement that he'd written. So that I deal with in Drilling Through Discovery. I just deal with the psychology of the interrogation, with the breakthroughs and when they happened, and some of the things Chris Watts says about who he is and his attitudes to confrontation and the kind of person that he is. And I think if you're interested in the Watts case, that's a really good book dealing with the discovery. I've also got hyperlinks to it, to the moments in the interrogation. So if you're interested, you should check it out. It's Two-Face Drilling Through Discovery, available on Kindle, and in about a week or two it'll be available in paperback again as well. Thank you for listening, and as I say, stay tuned for the CSA narrative dealing with 2825 Saratoga Trail. And I'll see you guys next time.